just to give a slightly more formal introduction, the panels today have caused the most interest because the quality of people is certainly way above what we saw in the United States. Functional Fabric Fair, we have a lot of respect for. We're helping them. But the biggest difference between the two shows, in my opinion, are the quality of the panels. Now, although you've got a university lecturer sat at this end, we have three specialists. We have one of the gurus of sustainability, Pamela. If you go back to December's performance days, she gave the fireside chat. If you want to open your mind, you need to play that back. We've got Robert, who is the editor of Hemp, and hopefully you're going to give us the detail that we need to know. And of course, Maren, who we've all just been listening to. So I'm going to pass over to Maren. You're curating us, and we're here just to answer questions.
Excellent. And with the help of the audience, I think we already got a pretty good start at the questions. And I would like to take up your question to Robert. Robert, what do you think is one of the best combinations? Like when you're, let's stick with fiber, since we're at the performance days. If you grow hemp for fiber, what dual condition can you create that would be, can you use the chives for building, or would it be better for a composite?
Okay, it's working. Well, it depends what you want to use the fiber for. For the construction materials you saw, you can use any kind of hemp fiber. So no matter if you grew the hemp initially for seeds, CBD, whatever. So for construction, you can use any kind. For some of the biocomposites that you also saw, it's actually better to have a stiffer fiber, which means also a fiber that was grown for seeds. For some other applications, you want to have a more elastic fiber, so a fiber grown for textile would be the best suitable thing. So. When you look into textiles, I think what most people here are interested, you cannot use hemp grown for seeds. You can use, though, hemp grown for CBD. Because there are two important things about what the textile fiber needs from hemp. The most important is that the growing is very dense. You need like at least 100 to 160 plants per square meter. And the other thing is the time of the harvest. If you want a good, flexible textile fiber, you harvest after 90 days in average. And seeds will be ready after 120, 160 days.
Nice. I hope that answered that question a little bit. Robert, you have your own company producing, personally, I love them, hemp-age textiles. And I wonder, is there anything that you can share, especially with the designers in the crowd, with the listeners? Is there anything that needs to be sort of addressed when you're working with hemp as a fiber? Is there any specific need that this fiber has?
Well, most of the problems on the way are solved when you buy a fabric, right? Fabrics have been, those problems have been solved for you. You have maybe little issues with the stitching. You need some better needles, yeah, that don't break so often. You will definitely have to spend a little more time on the ironing, that's for sure. And otherwise, you just have to be aware there are also several things you cannot do with hemp. So if it comes to ultra lightweight, like we see in the sports industry, hemp is heavy, and we cannot make it lighter. And there's this story going around about the hollow hemp fiber. Yes, from a technical point of view, if you got a really, really good microscope, you might want to say, yes, it's hollow. But actually it's not. It's the heaviest natural fiber we got. Yeah, that means it's a very good also shielding you from UV light as well as any other source of radiation. But you can never ever make a super lightweight sports garment out of hemp. That will not happen. You have to be aware of that. Then there's the crinkling, which you know from linen, which of course is not so strong for the short fiber, but like you will not have this flowing kind of fabric. So you just don't even try it. You see the fabrics, and a good designer, I think, knows what they can do with them. And the most difficult part of the work has been done when you order the fabric. The rest of it is quite similar to the usual work.
Okay. I want to come back and kind of give you all a little bit of an insight why we got this panel assembled the way it is. So Pamela as well as Robert actually are two of my expert interviews in the book. And I will say that these 10 expert interviews I have in the book were sort of like a hard to carry forward, because there's a lot of questions that I also started asking while I was working on the chapters, kind of going like, LCA. I wonder, or, you know, about the whole, like, you know, the more people you interview, and when you've met about, you know, 400 people from within the industry, it gets pretty blurry, because everybody tells you on some parts the same, but then on some other parts, the opinions just go completely opposite. So I kind of needed my respected experts, such as these two, to help me debunk a lot of these topics that I was working with. And Pamela and I, we met at one of the sustainability, I would say, what do we call that? The outdoor industry sustainability meetups in Italy. Yeah, it was actually in Ostana, in one of the places where I had come first to research on hemp being used for the building industry, and also to revive a very rural, tiny village. And Pamela really helped me to debunk this whole topic on LCAs, which to me was absolutely a book with 7 locks, because I kept hearing that hemp gets really, really bad LCAs. And I was like, well, I don't really get it. And I actually put in this slide a little bit earlier, which shows I will say very broadly, a watering device that I found in China after the hemp had been harvested. And then I was like, I wonder what they do. Now, this is where Robert helped me out, because he said, well, it's not there for watering the plants because they obviously have been harvested. Okay, I kind of got to that point myself. But the question really was, why is it there? And it was there for water. Well, I say water retting now, but the thing is that, you know, when the temperature between night and day is not creating for enough humidity, then you can't really get to the point of field retting. Field retting is needed, and I will pitch that ball to you in a little bit, but before I would like to pitch you a ball, because you haven't said anything so far, because I haven't asked any question, is where are these sort of magic points where hemp becomes or gets these really sometimes bad ratings in LCAs? I do have to tell a little back-end insider. I think it was at least 7 times that I called Pamela at nighttime, and I was like, Pamela, I need your help. I got an email from, I will not name any names, but from respected outdoor industry companies that were turning to me as a climate impact storyteller and photographer, and by no means any sustainability expert, to ask me why hemp had gotten a really bad rating on the Higg index. And I called Pamela and I said, what is the Higg index? I'm pretty sure we can skip that question here, because you guys are all from that industry and you know very well. But Pamela, can you maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I'll try. So when we're talking about Higg index here, we're talking to one specific tool amongst the 5 that exist, and that's the Material Sustainability Index, the MSI, which is, in essence, a collated collection of LCA data that go from cradle to gate. And that is important because it's not gate to grave, so the actual product piece is missing, so it really goes to fabric at the best. So that's part 1. Part 2 to know is also it can only rely on data that has been released for the public to digest in some way, shape or form. And that's sort of where Robert and I had a conversation just prior to that, and that is sort of part of where some of the problems sometimes arise. So if you look at both fiber and fabric, the data that you will see is fiber and then the whole post-production of that. And obviously the data gets fed in as it is being researched, as it is being assessed. And every year, every couple of years, those that maintain those databases recalculate the data they have in the database. Now, you can imagine that as good as your algorithm is and your standard is as you look at the data, if you have data that isn't recent, and some of the data points are older, they're confirmed, they were genuine at the time when they were assessed, they may potentially no longer be accurate now for one reason, as you probably will make the point later on, that in some geographies certain retting methods are no longer in use, but that's the data we have. We don't have alternatives in China or in Romania, where you just made a point. Romania no longer really grows hemp, but we do have data on the time when they were growing hemp. So these data exist, and there's no other alternative that we know, because everyone is sitting on their data a bit like that and says, this is my competitive advantage and I'm not releasing it. You can't update. So those databases are as accurate as the latest data that's being fed into them. And that's a bit the challenge. Sometimes you're not entirely sure which component of the 4, 5, 6, like if a fabric is the newest one, which one is the oldest one, because what you really see, and the process, the method has a standard, is correctly followed, you can do that, but you won't see which of those components is the latest and which is the newest one. What you see is when all that data has been digested the last time. So that could be 2018, 2019, 2022, it could be 2001 potentially. And that's a bit the thing with hemp. And this is sort of our hypothesis right now, as we've been discussing before. Those that are going into the MSI will see that, in particular for China and Romania, there's, water retting, I think we were talking about. That, well, in short, the average data for the hemp, for sort of generic hemp in eutrophication is not great. It's basically due because that data is based on water retting. Now, I'm not a hemp production expert. So, I really come more for the brand material evaluation side of it. And having had just a conversation, apparently that's no longer a method that's being used these days, and certainly not in a geography like Romania where there's no hemp to start with. But that's the data that exists. So that opens up. You really need to start digging into these things. And you can be as much of an expert in one area, but it's never sufficient. So there we start to be complementary on either side. And now we need to find ways to figure out, okay, why is that data exactly? Where is the original source of that? And as much as you have the data, it's not saying you can just always take things at face value. You still have to ask, where is the origin of the data? How old is it? Which component is how old? And then you can make an assessment of how good or bad an actual fabric is that you get in your hand. It's a good start for a lot of fabrics, but in particular for fabrics and fibers where the data is scarce, and there are a few of them around. Linen is another one that doesn't have an awful lot. You have more innovative fibers around, like some that are just coming into the market, like those that are into leather, the mycelium, the mushroom leather, or some of the spider silk aspects. You really don't have a lot of data that is commonly available. It's proprietary, it's not usually released. Databases have, if anything, like a small slice of it. And you just need to know that. It's no tool is foolproof. It gives you an indicator. You need to understand still what is underneath. And sort of that's where the conversation always sort of was going around, where we're helping each other to find out what's happening.
Yes, and I really rely on my experts, especially in the whole book. Now, Robert, may I ask you to debunk what we're seeing back here and how this whole, what is this whole thing about water retting? I think we need to probably elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, so water retting has a very, very bad attitude, and I think that's where those numbers come from in the Higg index also. The first time the first fiber comparison that I ever came across was done by Made By, And I was there at the initial presentation in Düsseldorf. I was also invited. I was introducing some other stuff there, and I was like, that's impossible. How do you get to those numbers? And the people who made it were there, and I didn't get an answer. It took me 3 years to get the answer, and the answer was internet research. So they looked up stories on the internet and made what is not an LCA, how I learned. Yeah, but they made those fiber comparisons. What you see here is, since water redding is also forbidden in China since many years, which I myself find absolute nonsense, by the way. But what they're trying to do here is try to make a different climate, right? Like they would be on the coast. We all know that linen, the biggest linen producers in the world are Belgium and France, and it's in the coastal regions. Why? It's very simple, because you know exactly what day in September you will have nice dews coming in from the coastal side. So this is the best linen in the world. Everybody knows it. And why? Because they got the perfect climate because of the Gulf Stream just passing by this coast and always carrying warm water and always delivering this moisture in the autumn when you need it after the harvest. In other parts of the world, that is very, very different and difficult. Like here in China, you got a continental climate, you don't have this dew in the night, so since water redding was forbidden, they try to make dew themselves by spraying. So this is not really watering like you know from other fields. They are spraying to make like a thin dust of water, like you have dew in the morning hours. That is for dew redding. But just to come back to water redding shortly, the bad image about water redding comes from the time when the world has last seen a world war. This is when hemp growing in every part of the world was at its maximum height, because back then also the war industry was depending on hemp heavily. Everything we know today made from synthetic fibers back then was made from hemp, even parachutes and everything. So all the countries involved in wars, they asked their farmers, grow hemp for the war. So, and it needed to be readied. And at that time, in areas where water redding was done for hundreds or even thousands of years without any negative impact, it suddenly all grew out of things. So fish were dying everywhere in all the rivers, when already the food was not good. And this was just due to those huge quantities that were suddenly redded, that were not a problem before, but then. And then we talk about the years after the wars, when not only quantities got down, but you also had like huge industries, especially in Eastern Europe, in Hungary, in Romania. So huge factories. The water would have been a problem there. But I think nobody ever read or heard a story about dead fish in the Danube or elsewhere because of hemp redding. Because back then also the wastewater was strictly controlled after the redding process. And actually the biomass you take out of this water is very good natural fertilizers for the farmers. So it is just a matter of handling, as well as we know it with all the chemical substances. This is a matter of how do I handle my wastewater. And to me, it was one of the worst decisions by the Chinese government that they forbid water redding like 50 years after other countries had done it for totally different reasons, even though in China there was never a pollution of rivers done by that, because those big water redding pools from the big companies all in northern China, in Inner Mongolia, there was not even a river near. So all the wastewater was sprayed on the fields, like you see here, which and also contained the natural fertilizer again, so there was never any water pollution done. And to me, water redding is still the most ecological way to do it, and we have very good researchers in Switzerland, in Italy. They have shown that in a controlled process you need very few water, you need no chemicals added, you just need the natural bacteria which are already on the plant. You got very small amounts of wastewater which can be treated very easily to be clean after. And this kind of water redding is something, compared to the dew redding that they try to do here, leaves you absolute independent of weather changes, climate changes. You have every year 100% good harvest, no impact by any weather, and you save a whole lot of energy by otherwise degumming those bast fibers in a facility with 130, 160 degrees, using caustic soda and other chemicals, which also can be taken out of the wastewater process, of course, but with the water redding, you wouldn't need them in the first place at all.
Thank you, Robert. That was a fantastic answer. And I actually want to show this is pretty much how it looks when this water is sprinkled up on the plants during the night, and then it's left, and in the morning it starts drying off with the sun again. And I think there was an the old people in Italy have continuously told me it's about 2 weeks of, just the right amount of good and bad weather to have a natural retting process going on the fields. And here we kind of come back to that question, why is none of this happening anymore on large scale today? It's basically because these old people stopped it. They never got a chance to actually pass on that knowledge that they had about retting or field retting the plants. And I have seen farmers who literally over 7 to 10 years have just been, trying to figure out when is the right time to get my fibers off the field, when do I need to take them off sort of under emergency because otherwise the fiber goes bad. Robert, I think I was with you at Hemp Age at one point when you had somebody come by, present you. They were very proud. They had just come up with their first batch of hemp clothing. And Robert looked at it and he said, "Oh, this is really bad stuff. I mean, this fiber is completely over-retted." And it's there's just a lot of knowledge, basic knowledge from that plant that just disappeared.
May I say something?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so if you read something about hemp today on the internet, you will definitely come across winter hemp, German winter hemp, European winter hemp. Actually, not a bad idea. You just leave the stalks on the field for the winter. They stand there, so they don't have direct contact with the ground, which makes it better for not have the mold eating them up. I mean, we have a natural fiber. Of course, it's biodegradable. Of course, yeah. So there were some initial testings because, again, if you have the special right climate, it might be a good idea. And there were some tests in Germany done, and the results were quite promising. But one have to understand the year from which those results came from was the driest winter in Germany for 45 years. Yeah, and I cannot go out there and tell a German farmer, it's a good idea you grow hemp now and you make winter hemp. Because maybe in 45 years we will have a good harvest. So much to winter hemp.
Pamela, in your interview, you ended your interview with actually a call for action, and I think this is exactly the place where we need to place that. Do you remember your call of action?
No. Honestly, not anymore.
I was trying to test Pamela if she's already read the book in her own interview. She hasn't.
I openly admitted I didn't yet.
Well, Pamela was suggesting that, or let me rephrase that question. What do you think is the next step up for the industry, for the hemp industry, to kind of join forces with the modern textile industry? How can we bring that plant back in the game? How can we use it for all its many features? I don't just want to degrade it to just carbon neutrality is the wrong word anyway, but to carbon sequestration.
Well, I think you made a couple of points earlier in your presentation as well. So one thing is data, because a lot of the decisions we take on a gut feeling aren't necessarily correct or not in isolation correct. So data helps us to get a more complete view on that. Data alone doesn't say anything. You still have to make a context of it, and I made that point before. And then the other point is, I think you really made a good point, this kind of round tables where the different players come together and actually have that conversation with what they need and what they can deliver on the one hand. So as a brand, you can create pull, but you also have a specific need in terms of quality of fiber, when the fiber has to be there, on certain expectations. And the same thing on the farmer, on those that do the post-production in between. And I think these kind of conversations are essential because, and this is not just in hemp, right? This is fundamental to a lot of what needs to happen when we talk sustainability and impact and making a difference. You need to understand what your peer needs, what is in the game for them, where their risks are, but also what they can give you. And it's only when you can start to bring that around that you can start to put the different puzzle pieces into place. And hemp is a really good example. I mean, you have the farmers on the one hand, and again, as you made the case, different farmers, different geographies, have different needs, have different deliverables, and have different climates, and that has impact. And similar with a brand, a sports brand has a different set of collections and different timelines than a fashion brand had, than a couture brand has. It's like all of them have different needs. If you go into production, it's the same story. You made the point of before with the needles. Again, it's like this is kind of you need to know that as a manufacturer, but you may